Hi, everyone. Welcome to the lecture on organizing your speech. Today, we're going to be talking about organizational patterns and the components that should be present in each speech that you give in this course. We're going to open with speech structure, and this is really important to understand so that you can account for all of these components as you're doing your outline for your speech. First, you'll have an introduction. We're going to gain the attention of the listeners. We're going to establish why we're telling them whatever we are telling them or trying to convince them of whatever we're convincing them of. We're going to tell listeners where they're going, give them a roadmap, and kind of set the pace for the rest of your speech. Within the body, you'll present the main points and supporting points. Your main points would be the things that you would list on the outline and say, I need them to know 1, 2, and 3. The supporting points would be that ABC underneath 1, ABC underneath 2, that are going to really bring in some solidity to your argument. In your conclusion, you will summarize those main points again, just to revisit them for the sake of the audience and remembering and reiterating those points. You'll also restate your thesis and remind them of the purpose or your argument, and then we'll challenge them to respond, right? So you will give them a course of action to take. You will ask them to go out into the world and do blank after you've told them why it's important. And you're really going to set them up for some kind of response to the speech they've just listened to. In your main points, you're making a claim. You should be expressing key ideas or themes of your speech. They should be identifiable. We don't want to hear a speech where you can't identify where the main points are. We need to know that they said recycling is good for the planet, recycling is good for the city in terms of revenue, and recycling is good because you have less waste in landfills. If those are your 3 points, they're easily identifiable and separate from one another. You should state them as declarative sentences, and they should flow directly from your thesis statement, which is kind of your overarching point of the speech. You will have supporting points, and they will organize the evidence that you've gathered to explain or justify those main points. Supporting points are generated with information you've collected in your research. So you will provide examples, narratives, testimony, facts, and statistics. All of these things you will either cite or draw from your personal experience accordingly. But those supporting points are really going to add to the impact of your main points. Unity is one of the elements that we need to consider when we're going about organizing a speech. You want to have your points that we've pulled from the thesis statement, but we don't want them to be so different that it doesn't make sense when you put everything together. We're aiming for coherence, right? Logic, sensible, just like when you put a sentence together, you know what order your words are supposed to go in, and you know how it's going to communicate to your audience. And then balance again. So emphasis is given to the appropriate part of your argument or your statement, and it allows people to pull out what you are saying are the most important parts of your speech. Transitions give direction to our speeches, so they tie one point to the next or one subpoint to the next. Just like you would have a transition in a movie from one scene to another, you don't want any kind of abrupt conflict between a point and the next point. You want them to move seamlessly together. They should occur between the introduction and the body, the main point in the body, so point A to point B, and between the body and the conclusion. In your introduction, you'll have your attention-getting device, a thesis statement, a credibility statement, a preview of main points, and a transition to the speech body. How do you gain your audience's attention? There are lots of ways to do this. There's no right answer, right? Every situation is different, every speech is different. And depending on what you're trying to do, if you're trying to tug at their heartstrings or if you're trying to latch onto their kind of logical, very empirical sense of the world, you're going to pick and choose differently. So you may tell a story, especially if you're trying to fundraise or convince people to take some kind of action. Stories can be really impactful. You want to establish common ground. That's always good. You can offer an unusual information, shock them into paying attention. And you can do the same thing with provocative questions or quotations. You can tell them a funny story or a joke. And you can refer to the audience or the occasion, maybe like when you hear at a concert and they say, "It's so great to be here with you in Lubbock, Texas." That gains everyone's attention because it's relevant to them and their situation. Your thesis statement is a single declarative sentence that expresses what the speech will attempt to demonstrate or prove. That is critical for your speech every time you give a speech during the semester, but it's also critical for your papers as well. If you're writing something or you're writing a proposal for work, we need to be able to pinpoint your thesis statement. What is it that is driving this speech? Establish your credibility. Make a simple statement about your qualifications or your knowledge. Maybe you'll say, "I am an engineering student. I've taken several courses about building a pipeline, and this is why I believe that we should build this type of pipeline at Texas Tech's new veterinary school." Right? So draw on your credibility. You'll preview the main points. And like we were saying earlier with recycling, you're not necessarily going to walk them through why recycling is good for the planet, but you may say recycling is good for the planet. And as we'll see, it's good for you and your wallet. So you'll kind of allude to those main points there and then go back and unpack them in the body of your speech. When you're preparing the conclusion to your speech, you'll signal the end, you'll summarize the key points, you'll reiterate the central idea, you'll challenge the audience to respond, and then you'll end the speech memorably. So remember, just like you gained their attention in the introduction, you're going to aim to gain their attention in the conclusion. And we're always reiterating, we're always restating and rephrasing our central idea so that when your speech is over, one of the last things they hear is you drilling that thesis statement in again. There are a couple ways to signal the end of the speech. You can say finally or in conclusion. Today we have covered this, this, and this. And just make sure to vary your tone, pitch, rhythm, rate, just to make sure that they understand you've moved from the body to the conclusion. And you do this naturally when you're speaking, but it's something to focus on as you build in your transitions. Your conclusion should contain a review of main points, a restated thesis, and a closing thought or call to action. Reviewing your main points is just like previewing your main points. Remember, we're not unpacking them here. We're just listing them again for our audience's sake because repetition is key. You'll restate your thesis. Again, we're trying to imprint it into the audience's memory. And then you will state a closing thought or call to action. Use what they've learned in their informative speech. Act in response to the persuasive speech. You want them to be there presently at the end of your speech and then go out and do whatever it is that you've been trying to convince them of the entire time. That is it for today on speech organization. If you have any questions, please ask your TA or get in touch with Dr. Langford. One of the best ways to work on speech organization is to practice it. Use your textbook, go through what makes for a good speech component and good speech organization, and use it to formulate your own speeches. Until next time, be well.